is 1300 too low to go for my fat loss phase? Kind of freaked out as I just hired a new coach and I'm not sure if I'm risking my metabolic health. Not a competitor. Thanks in advance. So, in this case, without knowing your body size, I really can't give like a final answer. And frankly, I don't really know what the dialogue was between you and the coach, because I've had people that have come to me who've been like, hey, I want to lose 12 pounds in 12 weeks. I'm not going to be able to do cardio though. So at their body size, I'm like, well, realistically, the best thing that we can do is control the variable that is the most accurate in terms of creating the deficit. So what I'd rather do is drop their calories to 1300 out the gate and hopefully get fat off from a point in which their body fat is at its highest point compared to where it's going to be when we end the diet. So a few things. Fat loss is going to be easiest when you begin a fat loss phase, when you are your fattest. So whatever starting body fat percentage that is, seemingly that is going to be better, more advantageous to you to lose body fat as opposed to the end of the diet. So you think in the course of 12 weeks, if you're losing 12 pounds, well, when you are at a net zero, you've lost 0 pounds. That's going to be an easier time for you to lose body fat than when you've lost 6 or when you've lost 10 or even when you've lost 12. So that's where I can't necessarily say 1300 is too low, because on the other end of this, it's like, if you are a very petite individual, if you don't have a lot of muscle mass, if you yourself are like, hey, like my training intensity is not that high, just given the current constraints, I would like to lose body fat, but I'm also going to be very limited on the cardio. These are all things that I have a client right now who's 4'10" and she's like very itty bitty even in her off season. And that's someone I'm very much like, hey, we need to lean on these lipolytics. We need to put fat loss agents in place because you still need to be eating enough. And even though it's technically less than someone, let's say my size, it's still it's still a very low amount of food. So that's where I wouldn't say blanketly, I can just tell you like, oh, like, yeah, that's way too low. This person doesn't care about your health. And the reality is there are a lot of people who are afraid to get aggressive with their diet. This is something I see time and time again. Individuals will come to me. They'll be like, hey, I want to lose body fat. I don't want calories to go under 1700. Can we do it like very, very minimally? I'm like, we can, but realistically, you're not going to see progress in the degree that you need to keep you on track. And if adherence has ever been a struggle, which I always assume for someone who has like a hard line in the sand, if you're like, I will not go under X number of calories, it's like, listen, I have that line in my head too, but that line over time has shifted from 1600 or 1500 to now I'm like, okay, this actually depends on how much activity I'm doing. Because if I'm very active, yeah, that line needs to be higher. That point of contention needs to take the activity into consideration. Whereas if I'm not getting in many steps, if I'm not doing cardio, if training intensity isn't that high, realistically, I'm like, okay, well, if my BMR is roughly 1300, 1400, it's like, there's no way I'm going to even be in a deficit if I try to sit at 15 or 1600, knowing that the workouts are not going to be what they should be. So I hope this was helpful. I know that like it can seem a little weird to be like, hey, like we just started this fat loss phase. Shouldn't we like ease into it? But truly what I found to be the most effective way to go about losing fat is when you enter that fat loss phase to hit the ground running, to go not necessarily implement extremes, but to be very committed to being in a deficit. And even if you decide after 4 to 6 weeks, you're like, okay, like I did the 1300 calories, I committed to it. I saw it out. I know now what I can expect in terms of the deficit. You might find that at that 6-week point, you're like, okay, like ideally I would have you do a diet break and be like, okay, how do we feel? What's adherence going to be like if we continue? Should we bring food up? That might actually be a really good point to discuss with your coach. Be like, okay, I made good progress the first 4 to 6 weeks, but maybe at this point we slow that rate of change down now that I'm a little leaner, now that fatigue is a little higher.